gentlemen, and we're now going to start our afternoon proceedings, but we're going to continue with some of the themes that we have already touched upon this morning, so that the discussions get deeper and deeper, more varied, and we look at all the possible angles on all the themes that have been broached already. So to do so this afternoon and to address really the issue of interference by third countries, which has been touched upon in the previous discussions, has been touched upon also in the opening speeches of the two presidents of the Commission and the Parliament, it is clearly an issue of extreme importance and of extreme concern as well to European politicians. So we have with us two experts this afternoon. We have Nada Kovačíková, who's the senior analyst at the EU Institute for Security Studies. Good afternoon. And Alexandre Alaphilippe, who is the executive director of the EU Disinfo Lab. And both of us will be led through the discussion by Irena Mozova, who's Deputy Director General at DG Justice and Consumers. So, Irena, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to see so many interested faces inside of the room, because the topic of this second session is really of utmost importance, because we will be addressing the covert interference by the third countries, and I also understand that you have already touched upon earlier this morning. You know that this topic of the covert foreign interference has been very high on the European agenda in recent years. And we can mention, for example, the work of the Parliament, of the INGE committee, among others, but also at the level of the Council. And there have been also several reports focusing on foreign interference in third countries, of third countries actually seeking to influence, but also undermine the democratic processes in the European Union member states. Now, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and the more broader geopolitical context that we are witnessing in these days, they have obviously made this issue even more burning and more important than ever. And if I'm speaking about it, so I have in mind the member states, the European institutions, as I mentioned already, but also the European citizens, because they are also very much concerned about the impact of the foreign governments meddling in the decision-making processes in the European Union, but also in the member states. And let me only quote from the rather recent survey conducted by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung on the European sovereignty. This is a survey which was conducted in 8 European member states, and they found out that 93% of the respondents consider that this is really essential or important to have common tools to combat foreign interference for Europe to be truly sovereign. So, as a small reminder, the session will, as already advanced to you, so will not focus on the policy development. This session will be mainly focused on the exchanging, the best practices, and the different examples also on a cooperation in the electoral matters, but also we will cover the covert interference by the third countries. As already introduced by Madam Moderator, so we have a true, very experienced expert sitting here. And let me now firstly turn already to Nadia Kovačíková. She has been already presented. She has a large experience in the field, and also she is a director of the project, which is funded by the European Union on countering foreign interference to strengthen the capacity of the common security and defense policy, which has to be also acknowledged here. And Nadia, I have to you 2 questions that, if you allow me, so I would put into the one basket in a way, because they are very much interlinked. So, first of all, Europe is an open space, and we welcome ideas in this place from abroad. So, how would you distinguish the legitimate influence from a covert interference? And let me bridge it now with the second question. So what would you say that are the main risks posed by the covert interference to elections? So, open place, legitimate interference and the covert interference and the risks. So, floor to you, Nadia.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. So not easy questions, but I have really tried to dig deeper within our project, which is ongoing and was just launched in the beginning of the year, Countering Foreign Interference project, but also what are the efforts already ongoing to counter foreign interference in the third countries, the allies, the partners of the EU, where we can hopefully also try to replicate some of those exercises, tools, or lessons. So how do we distinguish this legitimate and illegitimate influence versus interference, let's say? So I would like to put attention to what Australia has been kind of doing in defining the illegitimate interference, or the interference in the sense of undermining security and democracy. And they call it so-called 3Cs model. So it's activities by foreign actors or on behalf of foreign powers which are coercive, which are corrupting, and which are clandestine, or you could call deceptive. And they are trying to undermine Australia's sovereignty, values, and national interests. So as you can see, this could easily be replicated in the EU context or European democracies context, where these activities that are really trying to which are harmful, which may also be when we speak about FIMI, the foreign information manipulation and interference, which are coordinated, which are large campaigns that are having the aim to undermine democracy and the stability and also security. So this is not to bring new ideas into the forefront of the debate necessarily only. It's not to be constructive and contribute. It's really to rather disrupt, to polarize, to distract even. We look at the EU level into the models that are looking into how this deception, distraction, dismay, the threatening, how all these tools are employed by so-called malign actors to really undermine the stability, the unity, the democracy efforts, including elections, the tools, the institutions, but also security of the country. So here is the distinction where we are looking either the five model of the ABCD of the EU with the actors, with the tools, with the effects, incidents, etc., or the 3Cs, coercive, corrupting, and clandestine efforts. That's maybe the first attempt to respond to your question number one. Question number two, what are the risks? Well, indeed, it's very much linked. The risks are that we will have more and more fragmented and polarized society, that the extremism will win over the more of the stability and coordination and cooperation of different actors in the public sphere or in the whole of government approach, that we would contribute, or this would lead to more hatred and more violence within the countries, but also that the values of democracy, of the rule of law, of the practices of human rights support that would be undermined by these efforts, and therefore give more leverage to the actors, authoritarian regimes that do not have the same values and interests in mind, and that they are exploiting that for the benefit of increased power or financial gains or suppression of the freedom of expression within their countries, but also externally.
You have mentioned at the beginning the example when you've been giving us a kind of the definition of the problem. So would you have any concrete examples of interference or eventually good practices also how to mitigate those influences?
Yes, I mean, there are examples that I think we are all aware already from the 2016 presidential elections in the United States, where we know that at some point, the few months prior to the presidential elections, Russia-linked actors, they were spending $1 million per month to just build and fuel the trolls and bots, to also have different operatives. I think 13 of them were even condemned and exposed. Sanctioned to a certain extent. These are elections. We also know that there were interferences in terms of trying to fund parties in the United Kingdom or in other countries with this illicit financing, where there would be donations that, according to the national legislations, are much above the legal thresholds of what can be donated to a political party by an individual or foreign actors that do not have voting rights in the countries. We also know the investments, for example, by China in Europe, Europe's media organizations, is huge. And how is this being monitored? How is this being tracked that it does not influence the narratives, the products of the media in the public space when you have such a large billion, and we are talking here about billions of euros contributions to the media, etc., etc. So there are examples. And so what are the good lessons? There, I think, very good ongoing efforts within several member states of the EU, where just the fact of trying to inoculate the citizens in advance, knowing what are the, for example, the narratives being spread. In some countries, they are, prior to their elections, trying to create the proactive communication to expose that this is ongoing, these are the narratives, so just to prepare them for the elections with accurate information in a timely manner across various communication channels that actually the citizens consume, the way they consume it. I think very important lessons is that the people more and more are consuming information through the social media or internet much more than ever before, when it was more the TV, prime time, or radio or newspapers. And adopting and understanding and adjusting our measures to the evolution of the consumption of news, of information, is critical, because we cannot continue communicating as good, affirmative, accurate information through the channels that people are using less, but rather those that they are using more. There are EU institutional efforts. We discussed or heard earlier as well, the Digital Services Act, so the legislation on political advertising, and how to make the companies, not only social media, but big tech and advertisers more accountable. Hence, we have to see how it's going to be implemented. I spoke to some of you during the breaks as well. It's not only about creating these tools, but really implementing. And once they're implemented or not, what are the penalties if they're not? What is the accountability? How do you hold the measures? How do you measure the implementation and the success of it? So all of this is in the process at the EU level, but of course this trickles down to the member states level. And what I would like to highlight is what I see as useful tools. It's always very tangible and much more practical, like establishing the local or regional also task forces, of having different experts across sectors. So not only experts on FIMI or disinformation, but also on cyber, on law, journalists, young people we heard here, having them around the same table to talk together, so have this cross-sectorial approach, because many times we see that, especially when we talk about interference, it happens across different domains at the same time. There is a cyber attack on a government website, at the same time they undermine the credibility of the government being able to communicate the critical information, let's say, as we saw during the COVID times. So they attack you, then they spread narratives that you're not able to communicate, while at the same time they attacked your website. Then they invest funds into the critical infrastructure, be it technology, softwares, etc. So all of these tools are used at the same time. So we also have to respond with a cross-sectorial approach, so to be able to actually counter it. So very practical examples we saw, especially across Europe, the task forces that are trying to look at marginalized groups. So if you know that there is a targeted group, being the senior citizens in the society, or a minority within the society, you engage them much more prior to the elections, much longer than 6 months before. You work with them throughout the whole cycle, trying to see what are the threats, what are your limits, what are your resources, why, what divides you, what could we do from our side, be it government, EU, or other organizations. So maybe just to undermine, because we will have more time and there are more tools, but really keeping in mind that doing this on a daily basis, we know elections in Europe are ongoing all the time. We have all the member states, we have local, regional elections all the time, across and beyond also the EU, across the world beyond. So making sure that we pay attention enough to these issues beyond the election momentum, also that we invest enough funding into various tools, not only to counter disinformation, but really seeing it in a more holistic approach, and that we also engage actors that are either being agents of change or the marginalized targeted groups much more actively.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Nadia. So if I have to summarize your response, so it is first of all the building of the resilience of our societies, and also to investing in the tools at the European level, at the national level, but also at the local level, while involving cross-sectoral attendance or participation in those tools, and also to make sure that there is a necessary robustness of these tools, including the financing. Thank you very much. Now, let me turn to Alexandre Alaphilippe. He has been already introduced by the moderator as the Executive Director of the EU Disinfo Lab. So for those not familiar with this civil society organization, so it is gathering knowledge and expertise on disinformation in Europe. So let me turn to you, dear Alexander, from the other side, in a way, because you have a huge experience gathered in monitoring the situation on this information in Europe. So what, from your point of view, and we have heard already some of the examples from Nadia, so what could be the factors that increase the third country's ability to significantly affect the political opinion or even the European Parliament elections next year?
Good afternoon, thank you for having me. It's always complex to speak after Nadia because she said so many good things, so I will try not to repeat because most of the message is shared here. So what will increase the risk of covert influence? I'm not sure there are so much things that will increase the risks. We are already living in a place where we have daily covert influences operations that are happening in Europe. We have seen since at least now 18 months a Russian operation that we exposed called Doppelganger, which is aiming at hurting not only elections, but all kind of civic discourse in France, Germany, Italy, Latvia, the UK, Ukraine, and further. So there are already operations that are happening right now. We also see that the narratives and the actors behind this are not always third countries themselves. We do see, since COVID-19, that extreme American groups are now investing more and more against any kind of moderate debate on health issues and now on equality. And we do see, since the abortion referendum in Ireland, where many far-right religious groups from the US have heavily invested to turn the result of the referendum on an opposite direction. And we do see that movements like the movements of Mr. Kennedy Jr., the child and health vaccine, is now more and more active in many, many European countries, including Belgium. And you could see now that in the recent demonstrations about sex education of children at schools, that there is direct links with both US far-right religious and also Hungarian far-right religious groups. So we are witnessing a very concrete, not threat or risk, but actions happening on the daily things. So the frameworks exist. Nadia mentioned, like, you can name all the letters of the alphabet, so A, B, C, D, the 4 Ds, the 3 Cs, tomorrow, I don't know, the 2 Ws. Frameworks are existing to address that kind of issues. The question is how, as a community, we can address these, both in terms of protection, but also mitigation and potentially litigation. These covert influences are operating because most of the actors that are operating it have the feeling of impunity. They know they won't get caught, they know they won't get trialed, and they know they won't get exposed because it's complex to expose and to attribute some of these operations. So of course, the more we are shy about calling these actions as influence operations, the more these actors can push the line. And the more we are not ready to draw a very thin line about, and very thick line, sorry, about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, the more they will push on it. So the real question is how collectively we can work together, because we had historically people monitoring elections on one side and elections officials, people monitoring platforms on the other side and platforms policies, we had people regulating media, and we had civil society and journalists, and all of these people were working, I would say, in silo. The question now is just like, the resources are not infinite. So if we all hope in our own corner to solve the issue, we're going to fail, and we're going to fail together, and democracy is going to fail. So the question is how we turn these kind of actions that from member states and from election officials, who for a very long time has been some kind of prerogative of the state, just like this is our job as protectors of elections, how we can build some kind of trust and safety procedures with civil society, sometimes electoral watchdogs, media and journalists. That's the question, and that requires a lot of, I would say, aggiornamento of the thinking of election protections. We are talking about public safety here. It's protecting people against fraudulent elections is almost the same as protecting them against risk of an earthquake or emergency services, and to have ambulances and doctors ready to save you. So that's the main thing I want to bring here. And this kind of public safety approach requires in advance to know who are the people that will work on. Because if we're looking at EU elections, it's not that one actor, let's say Russia, has one team focusing on one country with one stuff. They will spread efforts to make sure that, of course, the infrastructure that is built maybe to influence France will be the same to influence Germany, will be the same to influence Latvia. And a single member state electoral commission may not have all the information about what's happening to Latvia, which might be using the same infrastructure. So the need of cooperation and exchange of information is crucial there, because if not, we may miss some things. And these people are not perfect, they're making mistakes. So of course we need to take advantage of this. Then why do we need to have that kind of buffer of civil society? Is because the worst case scenario for elections monitoring is where you have an incumbent candidate, which is, let's say, the party or the coalition in power, which is monitoring elections, and you have parties, political parties that are actually competing and that are accused of being under foreign influence or covert influence. That's the worst case scenario, because there will be a suspicion against the state, against the government, and against this. And at the same time, you will have a suspicion against the platforms, because we all have seen what platforms have not done in the past 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. So the situation we want to avoid is to have the people stuck between what they perceive as the Ministry of the Truth, the state, and what they call the private censorship of platforms. That's where the DSA is an interesting example of bringing together some kind of access to data, researchers, civil society into that part, because that's the buffer zone. And if we are enabling this buffer zone, investing in this buffer zone, and here I'm not going to only invest in tools, this also means investing in people. I'm part of an organization that has very little funding from the EU, which is problematic. Is it because I have money from an American philanthropy? Am I supporting American interests? I don't think so. But still, why do we have so much American philanthropy going in Europe? It's because we don't have enough European co-funding for organizations like ours. So we need to change this kind of mindset to make sure this buffer zone is sovereign, independent, and can hold accountable both governments, both political parties that can be under influence, and the platforms. And that's the only way this kind of ecosystem can work, and that we can rebuild trust. That's going to take 5-10 years maybe. But that's the work we need to start doing it now, not only for 2024, but for 2029, 2034. So this is the beginning of the journey today.
Thank you much, Alexandra. So in a way, so you are also following the line of Nadia, so building up the resilience, robust resilience, and investing in the tools. Now,
and humans.
And now I will add the two elements that you have mentioned. That means the focus on the common responsibility of the different variety of the actors exercising the rights, but also the diligence in the democratic environment. But at the same time, so you have not touched upon the way how to minimize the impact, because we've been speaking about the robust reply, we've been speaking about the different tools, and of course I should also once again mention the funding, because it's very important, and the variety of the actors. But what we can do, so when we know what are the different campaigns about, so what are the the ways how the third countries are interfering, so how we can minimize this effect on the public opinion and elections. And maybe if you have also any good example to share.
I think the first thing is to act. So we've been working a few times about Indian disinformation in the EU. You may have seen our reports on that. And we exposed how think tanks in this town, chaired by former MEPs, have been hiding the fact that they've been paid by Indian stakeholders. We exposed it. We exposed all the documents, which are in contradiction, direct contradiction with what's inside the transparency register of the EU. Still. So the first question is to act. First question is to act when something is being put on the public eye. Just saying like, we are investigating this. We are going further down the line to know what's happening. Because if not, of course, at some point, you try to understand what's going on, you know? I've done my part of the work. I have a little story about the hummingbird in the forest. Maybe of some of you have heard about this. So the forest is burning, and all the animals are of the forest are together and are holding a council, which lasts 2 days and ends up very late at night, waiting for a decision of the animals. And one small animal, just like while the forest is burning, is like flying. The hummingbird is flying to the pond, takes 1 drop of water and puts it on the fire. And all the animals of the forest was like, hummingbird, what are you doing? It's like, it's so useless. You know, 1 drop of water, do you think it will turn off this fire which is burning all the forest? And then the hummingbird says, no, but I'm doing my fair share of the work. So this is the thing. We all have to do our fair share of the work. If we are just hoping that somebody else will do it, then we have an issue. So the first question is to act, to recognize that we have regulation in place, and to launch this. Because if we do not, and I can tell you, this person is following all the transparency register rules, but something doesn't match up here. So it's really important that actions are taken to show what is the red line. On other part, we've seen that France has taken extra measures and pushed after the doppelganger campaign, when we had, and I remind it, impersonation of French government, impersonation of German government, to put these actors under EU sanctions. Now the question is, are these sanctions applied? And that's another one. So, but at least we need to have this kind of initial step to say, okay, this is a red line. We're drawing this red line and we're going further. The question is not only about third countries. We've seen recently in some Central Europe countries that campaigns are also going into a very, I would say, rogue way. Sometimes influence can also be, I would say, a mistake. A politician is in campaign, sees something he finds interesting, retweets it to millions of followers, and then the campaign is reaching out. But still, we need to have that kind of process to make sure at some point we can stop, take a decision, assess publicly, and to go forward.
So if I, again, try to sum up, so you calling for coherent and systematic, long-lasting effort of all the democratic actors in order to preserve our society from such an impact of the third country influence. Very good. So in order not to monopolize the discussion coming from this podium, but already thanking both of you for a very interesting introduction and suggestions and also examples, I would like to maybe turn back to those very important actors, which are actually the member states, and see whether we could also hear from them about their own experiences and the way, so how to mitigate these disinformation campaigns, and whether they can actually share with us some of those mitigations measures in place. I understand that we had a colleague from France who wanted to, how we will organize it. Would you like to come here into the podium or prefer to stay? Excellent.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Mesdames, Messieurs, j'appartiens donc à la DGSI, la Direction Générale de la Sécurité Intérieure.
Good afternoon. I am
Si je peux juste demander
a
à
member
être
of
pris en
the
photo, c'est la
DGSI.
seule chose
I
que je
am
demande
so the
de-
intelligence service. I would like
part.
simply
Ne
to
pas être
ask
pris en
you
photo, c'est
not
la-
to be
Merci beaucoup.
taken in
La Direction Générale de la
any pic,
Sécurité Intérieure,
be photographed.
dans le
So,
cadre de ses
General
missions de
Directorate
protection
for
des
Inner
intérêts fondamentaux
Security
de la nation, constate que la France est régulièrement la
can see
cible
that
de
France
manœuvres
is
informationnelles
regularly the
d'influence
target
émanant de
of
puissances étrangères,
influence
au premier rang desquelles
maneuvers
figure
and foreign
sans
powers.
surprise la Russie,
The first
mais
rank of
aussi la
which
Chine,
is,
la Turquie
without
et l'Iran.
surprise, Russia,
Si la
China,
majorité d'entre
Turkey,
elles
and
vise à
Iran.
valoriser
If
l'image et
most of
défendre
that
les intérêts des
aim
pays en
at
question auprès
defending
de l'opinion publique
these
française,
countries to the
d'autres manœuvres sont
French public
davantage
opinion,
destinées à
other
déstabiliser
maneuvers are more
politiquement
aimed at
la France
politically
et à entraver son
destabilizing
rayonnement à l'étranger.
France and
La Russie,
hurdle
la Chine
its
et dans une moindre mesure la Turquie,
spreading
à travers
outside
des méthodes
Russia,
et des
China,
narratifs
in a lesser
spécifiques,
measure
font
Turkey
preuve de
through
l'activisme
methods
constant
and
en la
specific
La
methods
mobilisation de l'Iran
are
sur le
quite
champ
master.
informationnel
Iran, when it
s'est
comes
quant à elle
to
ralenti ces derniers
intelligence,
temps, vraisemblablement sous
has
l'effet de tensions politiques et économiques internes.
quiet
Pour
down
autant,
their
l'investissement clandestin
actions
de
because of the
l'espace numérique
situation.
par l'Iran
Still,
reste
the
un sujet de préoccupation en
clandestine
France.
occupation of digital
Pour entrer un peu plus dans les
space by
détails,
Iran is still
si la sincérité des scrutins
important in
électoraux
France.
français en
If
2022
the
n'a
importance
pas été
of
remise en
French
question
election
par
in
le Conseil
2022 was
constitutionnel,
not challenged by
et si
the
à ce stade n'ont pas été
constitutional
observées
Constitutional
d'opérations
Council,
d'ingérence
and if at
directement menées par des
such
services de
point
renseignement étrangers,
there
la
hasn't
mobilisation de
been
relais
any
numériques et
direct
communautaires visant à peser
maneuvers
sur les élections ou sur le débat public en général a bien été constatée par la DGSI.
we could
Plus
see that
précisément,
there were an
s'agissant de la
influence on the
campagne
public debate,
présidentielle de
notably when it
2022,
came to
une
the
campagne de
2022
déstabilisation dans la
presidential
sphère numérique
campaign.
francophone
There was a
a été
destabilization
détectée
campaign
émanant des équipes de
French-speaking,
feu Evgeny Prigojine.
digital
Cette
sphere,
opération s'était
notably
déployée en
by
2 phases
Evgeny
et visait à
Prigojine.
délégitimer
This
la
was in
candidature du
2
président
phases,
sortant.
aiming at
La finalité de la campagne était de jeter le trouble sur l'intégrité du scrutin
destabilizing
électoral
the
français en
president.
poursuivant une logique de
And
déstabilisation
there
des
was,
intérêts
muddying
nationaux
of
en Afrique.
water,
La première phase de l'opération avait
and they
consisté en la
highlighted the
publication de
French,
contenus
action in
vantant
Africa.
de façon exagérée la candidature d'Emmanuel Macron par des comptes inauthentiques sur Facebook et Twitter.
There were fake
La seconde phase de
accounts on
l'opération,
Facebook
quelques
and
jours
Twitter
avant le premier
about,
tour des élections présidentielles,
unfavored President Macron.
consistait à prétendre que ces
A few weeks
contenus avaient
before
été
the
publiés
elections,
par des
these
agences de
contents were
communication
supposedly published
directement
by
mandatés
communication
par les équipes de
agencies
campagne
that
d'Emmanuel
had
Macron.
been directly
D'autres médias francophones
mandated
localisés
by
en Afrique de
Emmanuel
l'Ouest
Macron.
servaient
Other
également de
French-speaking
relais.
media were also
Malgré l'intervention
relays
de
of that.
quelques comptes
In
d'individualités
spite
françaises
of,
proches des sphères complotistes ou de
some
l'ultra-droite,
French accounts,
ce discours avait rencontré un écho
people,
très limité
this
sur le sol
narrative
national,
had a
probablement en
very
raison de
limited echo
l'impact
on the national
limité du discours
ground,
pro-russe
notably because
à
of the
l'égard
limited
de
impact of
l'invasion
the
de l'Ukraine et de
pro-Russian
l'interdiction des
narrative
chaînes
when
RT et
it came
Sputnik.
to the
Sur la même
Ukraine
période,
invasion.
une autre
On the
opération
same
d'influence
period,
numérique pro-russe avait
another
été
digital
détectée avec la
influence
découverte d'une
campaign
ferme de
pro-Russian
comptes inauthentiques,
was
usurpant notamment
detected
l'identité
by
de
an
candidats à l'élection présidentielle
accounts
française.
farm.
Les investigations menées par la DGSI
Investigation
avaient
by
relevé notamment une
DGSI
ferme de plus de
shown that there
2800
was a farm of over
comptes sur le réseau social
2,800
VK.
accounts on the DK
Le but était
webs-
probablement de forger les bases d'un narratif
social network.
montrant
The
de
base
fausses
was to
déclarations
have
privées
a
entre les
narrative
soi-disant
with
comptes des
full
présidents
private
français et ukrainiens
declaration
qui auraient
between
révélé
French and
une
Ukrainian
complicité
presidents'
cachée,
accounts
voire un
that
pacte de
meant
corruption.
a
Du reste,
covert
l'enrichissement personnel du président
complicity
Zelensky via des aides
or,
financières occidentales
enrichment of
est par la
President
suite devenu un
Zelensky
thème
by,
récurrent de la propagande.
Western funds, and this has become
Par
a
ailleurs, le sujet de
recurring
l'insincérité des
topic of
scrutins
Russian
électoraux,
propaganda.
à travers des exemples de supposé piratage de machines de vote électronique initiés par une partie de la sphère complotiste nord-américaine, avait été opportunément repris et amplifié par des influenceurs pro-russes, au point qu'il constitue désormais un thème récurrent de leur intervention avant chaque élection démocratique et contribue à jeter un doute sur la fiabilité des élections. Au-delà de l'enjeu électoral, diviser les États européens et affaiblir les institutions européennes figure à l'agenda d'un certain nombre de nos adversaires, comme parfois nos concurrents. Leurs services de renseignement sont ainsi orientés pour participer à cette stratégie visant l'Europe et ses institutions. S'agissant plus précisément des prochaines élections européennes de 2024, la DGSI considère que ces pratiques d'influence numérique sont plus que probables. Que ce soit au plan économique ou diplomatique, l'Europe et ses acteurs institutionnels sont en effet perçus par les pays cités au début de mon propos comme des irritants et des concurrents sur des sujets tels que les questions des droits de l'homme, le soutien aux oppositions, la remise en question de grands monopoles, la liberté d'expression et certains autres. Le Parlement européen, qui occupe une place de plus importante au sein du processus décisionnel européen, subira certainement de nombreuses actions d'ingérence déguisées visant à saper la confiance des électeurs pour cette Assemblée et nourrir ainsi un désintérêt pour cette élection. Or, une faible participation, nous le savons, c'est une légitimité contestée et donc une Assemblée affaiblie. Mais au-delà de ces manœuvres numériques, on observe d'autres formes d'ingérence dans les processus démocratiques basées sur des modes opératoires bien connus des services de sécurité intérieure et des services de police. S'appuyant sur l'inexpérience, l'ouverture d'esprit, la naïveté et parfois, il faut le reconnaître, la faiblesse de leurs cibles, les services de renseignement envoient au contact de ces cibles des agents redoutables par leur efficacité dans l'art de la manipulation et de la dissimulation. Se déguisant en chercheurs scientifiques ou en sciences politiques, en stagiaires, en femmes ou en hommes d'affaires, en journalistes, en chasseurs de tête, en lobbyistes, en experts d'un think tank ou en émissaires d'une ONG, et la liste pourrait encore être allongée. Ces agents usent de toutes les couvertures, on les appelle aussi des légendes, pour tenter dans un premier temps d'approcher leurs cibles, les cultiver, entretenir une relation légitime et intéressée, et ensuite influencer ce décideur, parfois le dénigrer, ou bien le promouvoir selon que la personne sert ou fait obstacle aux intérêts de son pays. Et là aussi, que la cible soit un haut fonctionnaire, un élu, un junior, un senior, rien n'arrêtera ce service de renseignement. Seul compte l'objectif que lui a fixé son service, ses dirigeants, pour atteindre, et tous les moyens sont bons pour y parvenir. Aussi, face à toutes ces menaces, et comme ce fut le cas lors des derniers scrutins nationaux et européens, la France veillera pour les prochaines élections européennes par des actions de sensibilisation destinées aux équipes de campagne à les mettre en garde contre toutes ces actions qui pourraient ainsi viser à altérer la sincérité de ce scrutin. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for sharing your stories, but also good and also bad examples of other third countries' interference. And now I understand that we have a colleague from Estonia. From France as well. So you will have a double presentation.
Double presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So my colleague presented you some examples of what's happening. I'm going to pursue in French. So, donc, je suis Ingenius et je travaille pour le service du Premier ministre, le secrétariat général de la Défense et de la sécurité nationale. Et donc, il s'agit d'un service intergouvernemental. Et donc, nous travaillons justement à répondre, à trouver des dispositifs pour répondre à ces menaces, à ces
on
enjeux.
finding schemes
Donc
to
l'ingérence
face
étrangère déguisée
these
dans les
challenges
élections
and take up the
et plus
stakes.
généralement dans la vie démocratique de l'Union est bien sûr une préoccupation très importante pour la France parce que, comme nous venons de le constater, il s'agit d'une menace réelle pour la vie publique et pour nos institutions. Et donc nous pensons que c'est par une logique de transparence que nous allons pouvoir assainir l'environnement qui profite à ces ingérences étrangères. Mais en même temps, nous devons veiller au respect de nos valeurs démocratiques. Et c'est pour ça que nous défendons une ambition élevée pour le renforcement de l'organe interinstitutionnel d'éthique qui est actuellement négocié entre les différentes institutions et organes de l'Union européenne. Alors, en France, nous disposons déjà de dispositifs utiles en la matière et qui ne sont pas forcément dédiés à l'ingérence, à l'influence étrangère, mais nous essayons de les mobiliser aussi efficacement que possible pour répondre dans un premier temps à ces enjeux. Donc, nous avons par exemple un registre de lobbying qui est un des outils que nous pourrions davantage utiliser pour lutter contre l'influence étrangère déguisée. Donc nous disposons en France depuis 2016 d'un encadrement de la représentation d'intérêts qui impose à tous ceux qui conduisent des actions de lobbying auprès de responsables publics de déclarer leurs activités à une autorité indépendante. C'est la haute autorité pour la transparence de la vie publique qui contrôle et qui publie ces déclarations. Et ce cadre va s'appliquer aussi bien aux représentants d'intérêts économiques d'une entreprise française ou européenne, par exemple, qu'aux représentants d'intérêts d'une puissance étrangère ou de l'une de ses émanations. Donc, de facto, l'influence étrangère de nature politique est concernée par cette obligation. Nous travaillons évidemment à mieux faire connaître ces dispositifs par différents textes réglementaires. Alors, au niveau européen, la France est particulièrement mobilisée sur les textes du plan d'action pour la démocratie qui ont été présentés en 2020 et qui sont désormais en phase finale de négociation. Les autorités françaises plaident pour que le règlement sur la transparence du financement des partis politiques européens envisage des mesures fortes. Tout d'abord, une interdiction totale de financement externe des partis politiques européens et des campagnes référendaires nationales. Ensuite, un contrôle de la participation des partis politiques non européens aux organes de gouvernance des partis politiques européens. Autre dispositif, le règlement sur le ciblage de la publicité politique qui, à notre sens, devrait inclure les campagnes identifiées par les plateformes comme ayant un objectif malveillant. Et nous pensons aussi qu'il convient de rester ambitieux sur l'interdiction du parrainage par des acteurs issus de pays tiers de la publicité politique avant des échéances électorales de l'Union européenne. En termes de perspective et pour répondre à beaucoup de points qui ont été soulevés dans cette Assemblée, nous pensons qu'il faut aller plus loin dans la transparence. Parce que notre expérience nationale montre que les dispositifs de transparence qui vont couvrir indéfiniment tout type d'influence ne sont pas suffisants et surtout, ils ne sont pas adaptés à l'influence étrangère déguisée qui, par nature, et comme cela a été expliqué par mon collègue, s'exerce de façon plus clandestine, plus opaque que des activités de lobbying classiques. Nous pensons que seul un dispositif de transparence spécifique à l'influence étrangère permettrait de traiter réellement cette problématique en mettant, par exemple, en exergue les financements reçus. Et c'est pourquoi la France soutient activement l'initiative de la Commission qui vise à créer, comme l'ont fait plusieurs de nos partenaires non membres de l'Union européenne, et je pense notamment à l'Australie qui a été citée par Nada, d'un cadre spécifique de transparence pour l'influence étrangère sur la vie publique. La priorité pour nous est l'influence qui s'exerce au niveau européen, national ou local auprès des responsables publics qui sont des cibles d'intérêt particuliers pour les agents d'influence étrangers
interesting
et donc
targets
ils doivent
for
bénéficier d'une sensibilisation
foreign
et d'une
agents.
protection
These people
particulière,
need to
comme
have
cela
a
a également
specific
été présenté
protection
par mon
as
collègue de la
what
DGSI.
also presented
Nous
by
serons
my
donc
colleague of the
très attentifs
intelligence
dans les
service.
discussions à venir
We
sur le
will be
texte de la
very
Commission à
attentive,
ce que cette
very
problématique soit
careful
bien
to
prise
the
en
text of
compte.
the Commission, and
En
we hope that
revanche,
this
nous devons
problematic will be
tous
taken into
collectivement
account. We
réfléchir
also need
à la question de
to
savoir si
think
l'influence
all
plus diffuse
together
qui va s'exercer dans le débat
about
public par les médias, les réseaux
the
sociaux,
influence
peut
that will
être aussi traitée par
happen
le
in
même
the
instrument.
media and social
Parce que
network
cela
could
ouvre
be tackled
considérablement
by
le
the
champ
same instruments,
et nous
because
courons le
this
risque d'un effet
opens the field
contre-productif,
and we can have a
notamment pour ce qui
counterproductive
concerne la lutte
effect,
contre les
notably
manipulations de
when it comes
l'information,
to fight
en
against
démonétisant la parole des
information
émetteurs publics,
manipulation.
comme vous le disiez, Monsieur Alaphilippe.
And
Et nous
exactly as you
veillerons
said,
donc
Mr.
à ce que cet
Alaphilippe, so
instrument
we
soit
will make
bien
sure that this
calibré
instrument
pour
is
garantir le
well
respect
calibrated
des
in
droits
order
et des
to guarantee
libertés
rights
fondamentales. Je vous remercie.
and freedoms. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. It has been a really very complete presentation of the mitigations, but also in the risks ahead of us. So thank you very much for this very rich double presentation. And I understand that, and apologies for confusing, because I understood that there is also speaker from Estonia who would like to share some national expertise and also mitigation suggestions. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I represent the electoral office of Estonia here, and we had parliamentary elections in March this year, and these were the first elections since the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, which completely changed our preparations and outlook on the upcoming elections. And in terms of foreign interference, I can somewhat happily say that in relation to past elections, there were no major incidents or attacks. But on the other hand, if we look at the picture in general, then Estonia has been under constant attack since the beginning of the invasion. And in terms of cybersecurity incidents in 2022, there were over 2,600 incidents that were registered and that had an impact of some sort. Over one half of those were phishing attacks, but if we look at the attacks on the government institutions, then the number of distributed denial of service attacks quadrupled the last year. And these attacks were often coordinated, large scale, and targeted several state institutions at the same time. So if we say that there were no attacks against election systems as such, then there were attacks against other institutions in general. For example, close to the election day, both the websites of the Tallinn airport and the website of the President of Estonia were targeted by DDoS attacks by, well, we can supposedly say by Russian hackers. Therefore, what has helped us immensely is cooperation with the State Information System Authority, their cybersecurity agency, and the emergency response team, and also certainly in terms of disinformation, the strategic communications division of the Chancellery of the government. So we have and are monitoring elections space through the election cycle, both internet and both social media, so that we would be prepared to respond. And another issue is, of course, voter awareness. So we, with Information System Authority, have run campaigns both in regards to cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. We also try to prep the political parties and candidates before the elections to make them aware of possible attacks. How interested they are right now in this is, of course, another matter. And also there are several like myth busting and fact control initiatives. We also ran a separate myth busting webpage on internet voting. So in conclusion, what we as election administrators benefit is in general the Estonian infrastructure, that we are integrated into this and that we can work together and address these threats together as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for also giving us the concrete examples. Is there anybody wishing to add from the point of view, participants, any good practice to share, or eventually questions to our panelists, Nadia and Alexandra? I'm just looking around. Yes, please, there is a gentleman in the first row, and the microphone is coming.
Yes, Patrick Pennings from the Council of Europe. Thank you for the very interesting examples and very specific information given. I think that's very useful. I had a question because, of course, we're focusing on interference from third countries, but we know that there is also quite a number of commercial, whether organized or non-organized individuals that interfere for reasons of fun or financial gain, and I think it should not be underestimated. As we saw now in the Argentinian election campaign, which was primarily led on TikTok by a young economy student of 23 years of age, it basically means that the possibility of interference becomes so easy in a way that I think it is important not to focus solely on the intervention of third-party countries, but it may come from any angle with, as we've seen in critical infrastructure attacks, are not necessarily coming from third countries, but may come from different angles. So I would like to know if there's any research on that aspect as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for linking for the most recent elections in Word. So I don't know, Nadia, Alexandra, whether you would like to come in on the possible research outcome on these factors which are linked to the third countries' interference in the electoral processes.
Yep, two things on that. Thank you for your question. I think the playbook for interference or influence for money is quite known, and we've exposed in Brussels some kind of, can I say media? Yes. Media, Brussels-based media that are really on the pay-for-influence scheme. So you pay a journalist that can do any kind of roundtable on the topic that you want to cover and invite the people that you want to invite. And it seems like a genuine media event, but if you dig a bit more, you do see who can pay for it, or you actually have some information. And we've seen that many countries, I would say, in the context of the events in Caucasus now, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we've seen that some governments have been playing an important role in Brussels, not only through media, but also through companies or associations, business associations, etc. So we do see that this is an issue, which is public, because if you search for these media, you can find that they don't have a good reputation, but that does not prevent spaces being rented inside the Brussels Press Club, for instance, because some kind of the press clubs don't want to interfere with that and are very happy with receiving a bit of subsidies and renting fees from that kind of event. So that's one issue. Another issue sometimes is we are stuck between two kind of influences. I was in Paris, so sorry again for the French examples. You had too many of them in this panel, but I was in Paris this weekend, walking into the streets when I saw very strong poster campaigns against the Chinese Communist Party. And I know these come from the Falun Gong, which is also a movement which is also very far right and very close to Donald Trump. So, you know, between the Chinese Communist Party policy and far-right policies against the Chinese Communist Party, just like you can be balanced between these kind of two operations which are pushing you into different directions. So that's also the issue. We are in the center of this kind of political battles and geopolitical battles in Europe, and it's not one side against the other, because we do see they use the same kind of techniques and the same kind of covert influence operations. So the question is really to have that kind of middle line and to be able to, as I was mentioning, to have this kind of ethical compass that civil society can help to hold accountable everybody and to help citizens to work with that.
And of course, the question is, so how much pro bono the business community is and how much the business ties are with eventual sponsor of those specific actions.
Yeah, on this, it's very fun if you watch, if you follow closely some of the slaps or any kind of lawsuits that are launched in France, again, sorry for that, against some journalists, some genuine journalists or academics, which are all represented by the same lawyer, you know, which is the same lawyer than Russia Today. So, of course, this raises many concerns about potential coordination of these kind of efforts to silence academics and civil society in France.
This brings me to the thought, so that maybe before wrapping up the session, so how we can counterattack in a way. So we just heard the example from Estonia about myth busting. So do you see any other effective communication with the citizens about the risk and challenges that could make a difference? And now I'm turning to Nadia.
Thank you. And before I fully answer your question, it's what was also mentioned by one of the speakers before the lunch about how do we build this trust with the public, and how also the social media channels could be owned much more by public and not necessarily the state, but because it's public sphere and it's in the private hands now, while the messaging there is about, and it's part of the democratic freedom and expression, it's also the question of how do we enable the processes being in a healthier information sphere? And you said pro bono businesses, that's kind of like an oxymoron, right? Like, as it was mentioned, businesses, they have the aim of profit. And if this helps them to get more profit, to spread this information, you know, the accountability measures, the fines, the laws are probably one of the most effective ways how you can do it. Otherwise, they don't have a motivation or the reason if they are allowed to enable that. So just coming back now to your answer about how can we communicate more proactively, let's say you said in a more like attack back, you know, or like be more offensive in our own communication. So first, we have to have something to sell. And if the policymakers want to be more trusted and more credible, there needs to be also a lot of work to do credible policies and make people trust them through the actions across all kinds of fields of activities. Because just saying things better across more channels in a more simple, targeted way is not gonna do it all. There needs to be something to really present in a way that people see that there is a lot of work behind it. There is they are listened to as well, the citizens. So it's we heard from the youth, but we are talking here about other groups within societies that they don't feel they have a voice or they don't have a voice. So how do you engage the people so they feel like they're part of those democratic processes and not having this narrative of the elites versus 99%, or that you know, only certain actors have access and not the others. So thinking in a longer term, more sustainable, more coherent, as we heard also the policies, is first, there needs to be this ongoing effort across all the fields that the citizens see that they can trust the governments, not only to communicate better, but having the proper policies that are reflecting the grievances, that are reflecting the tensions and responding to the tensions in a policy way as well. And then they will start to engage perhaps more and see the reason and go more to vote and maybe vote in a more, hopefully, for more democratic forces and not polarized. So I do think that this proactive communication is very important. Having information, we discussed a little bit, maybe declassifying and exposing information enables citizens to be better resilient, and if they have better information, they may also make better decisions, but that's not all. It also needs to be much more about building credibility through other actions where the other voices across society are engaged, they are heard, but they are also represented in the decision-making processes.
Thank you very much. Last comment from Alessandro.
Yeah, very last comment. I think I've seen in 6-7 years now the change of I would say position of many public administrations. It's hard for civil society when you see something to find the right person to talk to, and we had the chance in the past 3 years to have contact points with French authorities, with Estonian authorities on some case of covert interference, and this helps because we know we can't go all the way down the line with you, but we can provide you some answer, and by having that kind of private communication and private way of speaking, that helps to build the trust and that helps to go further and to know what's going on. And when you're in the dark, you have the tendency in the train to shout just to show where you are. But if you have a little bit of light, you know exactly what path you can take, and let's hope we can take this path together.
Indeed, so let's take this path together. This is also the purpose of this high-level event, in order to discuss jointly, to share the best practices, and to assess how we can jointly, focusing on your example, so can make a difference. Because together we can do many big changes. And let me also remind, and you have mentioned SLAB, there have been also mentioned other legislative proposals that they are still laying on the table prior to the European Parliament elections, so we count on your support. Let me thank on your behalf the two panelists, Nadia and Alessandro, and this has been a very difficult topic to cover, but you have done an excellent job with all your insights and good practices. Let me also thank France, Estonia for sharing with us also the way how you are attacking these difficult and complex elements. And yes, to be continued, because together we can make a difference. Thank you very much, and also thank you for the great interpreters that I'm seeing on the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irina, for moderating this session. Thanks to our speakers indeed. And we're going to continue looking at things from a slightly different angle. Again, this morning in several of the panels, in several of the discussions, the issue of political advertising was mentioned, and the need to make sure that political advertising is not necessarily framed, but it is honest and fair. And it is indeed essential for political parties to be able to have access to advertising ahead of the elections. But at the same time, if we look at the digital age, it does present a lot of new challenges that already have been around for a few years, but the challenges evolve together with the digital practices. And yet, there may be some opportunities for political advertising in this digital age. So that's what we're going to discuss with our new panel and with our panelists now. So I'd like to welcome Sandro Gozzi, who's member of the European Parliament, Giacomo La Sorella, who's the president of the Italian regulator AGCOM. Good afternoon to both of you. Eliška Pirkova, who's senior policy analyst and global freedom of expression lead at Access Now, and Karen Massin, who's head of government affairs and public policy for EU institutions at Google. Welcome to all four of you. And I'd like to welcome back Marie-Hélène Boulanger from DG Justice and Consumers to take us through that panel.
After Dina's music, thanks a lot. I'm very happy to welcome you to session 3. And I would like also to apologize on behalf of Julien Mounier, who is the director in charge of democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. He will join later on, but he could not make it for this panel, so I have the pleasure to replace him on this panel. This session focuses on political ad, opportunities, challenge, especially in the digital age. Using political ad to convey message is now a common feature in our democracy. The time of, when I was young, the time of my parent, of billboard, of television, of radio, of poster, is gradually over and being replaced by this new phenomenon, which is especially digital political ad. So it's easy to disseminate, it's rather cheap, and you can customize. So this shows why it's so important for political players to use these new tools. If opaque, it can also create risks for our democracies. This session is going to address political ad, see how they affect our democracy, notably in the context of election. So what we would like to do now is to focus on best practice, but before that, I would like to give the floor to a member of the parliament, Mr. Gozzi, who is the rapporteur of the lead committee on the proposal that the Commission has presented to provide for common standards on political ad. You have the floor.
Thank you, thanks for this invitation to this very useful and timely debate, I would say. We are very committed in this initiative on political advertising because we think that we are doing something at the heart of our democracies. Let's say plural because, of course, the laws about which we are talking about, it will apply not only to the European elections, but to any kind of elections. And we are convinced that it is time to have a common framework, more transparency. We want to better know who does what, who pays for what, who pays whom. And we also want to, on one side, enhance and update the protection of sensitive data and personal data when it comes to political advertising. On the other side, we want also to build up a truly single market of political advertising, which does not exist. And this is another problem for democracy. So on one side, certainly, the aim of our initiative, as I was saying, is to better protect the election through a better transparency and information. Not only linked to the formal political actors, but linked to anybody who is liable to influence the outcome of an election. So, I mean, the first issue about which we have been discussing at length, and we are still discussing in the negotiations which are ongoing. We have already got 5 meetings between member of the parliament and member of the council. We'll have a 6th meeting, which I hope will be the last one on the 6th of November. It is clear that, first of all, we have discussed, with the help always of the Commission, isn't it? we have discussed about what we call the scope. I mean, how far we go in, including actors beyond the formal actor, which is a candidate to the European elections or a political parties. But we think that we have to go beyond, and now the discussion is also how far beyond the notion of services, the strictly notion of services based on Article 57 of the treaty, we want to go, including, for example, in-house activities. I mean, there are issues which are really at the center of the negotiations between the institutions now. The second point is, as I was saying, to enhance transparency and due diligence obligation. We want that in any part of Europe, when you receive an ad, which is a political ad, as a user, as a citizen, you clearly can recognize it. This is a political ad. and he is the political head of the campaign of Sandro Gozzi at the 2024 European elections, if my party will want me as a candidate, I don't know. But whatever, if they want, that should be like that. And then you should have also a transparency notice where you go, you go inside, you open, and you would have more specific information, for example, who is the sponsor, how much money is used for this campaign. I mean, we don't want, from this perspective, ban anything. We want to make it more transparent and more understandable and clearer to anybody what is happening around a political campaign. We want also an harmonized lab and label. And the other issue is what to do with how to treat the question of sensitive data. You have to understand that this the initiative, which is based on two fundamental horizontal law, two lex generalis, as we say in legal terms. On one side, of course, the GDPR regulation, on the other side, the Digital Services Act. What we are doing here with political advertising is to develop a special legislation, a lex specialis, a sectoral legislation to political advertising. So we have to take into account and not to repeat what is already foreseen in the GDPR regulation, also in the light of the recent jurisprudence of the Court of Justice, which is very important, which is an element which I think can be a part of the compromise. On the other side, take fully into account what is already foreseen in the Digital Services Act. And having done this, how and how far we want to go in strengthening the protection of sensitive data when it comes to certain techniques, which are the techniques which are more and more used for the political advertising campaign, much more than the posters, as you were rightly saying. I mean, amplification technique, targeting, micro-targeting, etc. And here, the negotiation is still, very intensive, but I hope that also on this point, we can find a positive solution on the 6th of November. Then, and last my point, and then I stop, but of course, if there are questions, I will be very happy to try, if I can, to answer the question. The last issue is to build up a truly single market of political advertising. Because, the paradox is that we talk about European elections, we talk about European political parties, we talk about European political groups in the parliament which can do campaign, which have the possibility to do campaign, political advertising campaign, information campaign, all over the continent, and then you have 27 different legislation, and then it happens like it happened with the major, one of the biggest platform in 2019, that you cannot sign a contract and organize a transnational campaign in the 27 member states. You have to sign 27 contracts. And this is clear, so this is just an example of the barriers, the obstacles which are still existing in the single market to this kind of services, which is political advertising, that we want to dismantle, we want to eliminate. So, because it is absolutely contradictory to talk about European democracy, European politics, transnational civic space, and then you cannot run a transnational campaign, not even in the European election. So this is another point, linked to the need to build up a single market. This is only in a nutshell. There are many other things, but I think that, I wanted to give you in this introduction a gist of the work that we are doing, and I hope that it will end up positively on the 6th of November. We are working on that anyhow in the European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing this. And I would like now to go to the best practice part, I would say, just before the election, and give the floor to Mrs. Massin, who is leading Google's government affairs and public policy teams in Brussels. We would be very interested to know how you see the current technological trends, the market development. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. First, we also believe, as MEP Gozzi was saying, that it's very important to have political ads because they do help for democracy. It allows basically typically the smaller political parties, the new candidates, the people who have small budget to actually be able to actually be heard, because typically they would have less airtime basically than maybe the main political parties. It also allows every political party, because we see that political ads are used across by all political parties, to also reach out, as you were saying, Ms. Boulanger, basically to the young people, because they don't actually read the news the way, I still read the newspapers, they don't read newspaper anymore, so reach out to them is also quite important. And the way we define political ads at the moment, which is likely going to change, of course, according to the result, is basically candidates. It's already elected politicians, political parties, and referendum. And we verify the advertisers before they actually allowed to put the advertisement online. And it's only based in Europe, because we were talking before about basically foreign interference, and this is something we do not allow. Basically, only the advertisers in Europe can actually advertise. In terms of data, we only use 3 data for political ads, which is the age, the gender, and the geography. We don't actually allow at all any sensitive data, and we think this is very important, and we think this is not needed as well to basically do the work for political ads. And also for instance, we have a repository which is available on the website, and what we do exactly, which is going in the direction of what we're discussing, basically we indicate about how much has been spent, how many impressions were done, what was used in terms of targeting, which geography, we know which basically age of the people, and it's actually more than what you would find basically on the radio in terms of transparency, or what you would find, on the TV spendings. But it's very important, and that's available on our website. Of course, there is a lot of legislation like the GSA, the covert disinformation, which I think have really added on in terms of the transparency. And I think we're going to see how the legislation is going to be implemented, because of course it's going to widen the scope, which is going to be quite a change in terms of the implementation time, because we're going to have to speak with national regulators, so all that basically is very much in flux. Going into the new technology, which I think is very interesting, because it's been really, really fast changing, at the moment. I think you've all heard about generative AI and actually all the AI tools. So this is a great opportunity to be creative and also to reach out. So if we're talking, as Amy Picozzi, about, a parliament campaign, reach out about disinformation in 27 languages, actually with AI tool, you will be able to do an automatic translation of the voice. So great success in terms of reaching out. You can also ease, in terms of helping a new candidate to come up with a nice video, or to come up with nice wording. So really, really helpful. But of course, you want to make sure that this is not going to be used negatively, which, as we know, can be used negatively. So in terms of us, what we've done is that we are developing generative tool and AI tools. So we've basically said that it is forbidden to be used basically to mislead, to bring to misinformation, or to harm people. We also have across our advertisement policy, not only political ads, but also all policy. It is not possible to manipulate or to mislead the users. So for instance, the deepfake, are going to be forbidden, basically automatically removed, for our policies. And then from mid-November, what we're doing is for political ads, specifically, we're going to do signpost, which is basically everything which is synthetic content. It's going to be clearly disclosed so that actually people can see, if it's not against our policies, but it has been actually quite changed, it's going to be disclosed on the video, what is going to be changed. And this includes basically for images, for videos, and also for audio, because you have sometimes the story that people actually manipulate, the audio and keeps the video. And we're also coming up with a lot of tools, because it's a very moving, environment at the moment. So, for instance, we're coming up with something called Synth ID, which is every time something is going to be changed by generative AI, in the pixel, basically, we will put a marker. So it will be easier for to be identified. Of course, we need all the creators to do that, so we can identify each other. But at least this is what we're going to do already, because it's quite important. And also we're coming up with something called metadata, which is every time someone is going to come up with a video, the creator will be allowed to give some context and actually information about how this image was created. And then you will find basically on Google search, when you say about this image, you will be able to see where was it first put, what's actually, you could fact check it, you could actually get much more information around it. And soon, in a few months' time, if you use Google Lens, which is basically you take a picture of something, you will be able to do that search, and I'll link to that metadata as well. So a very fast evolving environment. I think it's about fighting the bad actors, as fast, by creating tools and controls. But I think very, very, very important that we discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us your insight about this very evolving environment, as you just mentioned, and also how you go about it. I would like now to continue with the lady on my right, who is from Access Now, who is defending digital rights of online users. Mrs. Pirkova, from your perspective, how does the utilization and potential manipulation of data in political act impact the integrity and effectiveness of our democratic sphere of political campaigning? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I think many great points have been already raised at the beginning by Mr. Gozzi, and of course the proposed regulation on political advertising is one of our main priorities in our work, precisely for the importance to protect public and democratic discourse in the EU. And not only within the context of this legislative proposal, but in general, the abuse of personal data of users, individuals and groups have been very much shaping and influencing the way how we receive, form and impart opinions and information online. And freedom of opinion as such is of course an absolute freedom that has to be protected under all costs. And we saw a number of different practical examples, starting from Cambridge Analytica, but then moving on over the years, how powerful these tools, whether in the form of ad delivery techniques or political advertisement or targeting and profiling users can be. And even though we still need a more research where precisely frameworks such as Digital Services Act will be essential, that now contain a data access framework that will be mandatory for very large online platforms to enable, and vetted researchers will have that access to data, we will have even better understanding of how actually these manipulation of opinions and influencing and potentially polarizing society happens. I think even prior, the proposed regulation on political advertising started to be discussed in the EU. We achieved quite a landmark within the Digital Services Act, which is sort of even strengthened the existing protection in the GDPR when it comes to the use of personal data and sensitive categories of personal data. And we now have the real ban on the use of sensitive data for the purpose of targeting under Article 26.3, and hopefully we will be able to enforce these ban in upcoming months and years adequately. And we wouldn't like to see from the perspective of civil societies that we will have less protective standard in the complementary or more sectoral legislation that is currently being negotiated. So ultimately, the goal of civil societies who defend public interest online is to achieve at least this standard within the regulation, because it is precisely the public discourse, democracy, the freedom of opinion and voting rights of individuals and groups that are at stake. Lots of time, the transparency is also being emphasized, and I think transparency of political advertising is essential, and there are a number of protective measures within the proposal, but it's also about the transparency of individual users, so the way how we understand why we see certain piece of advertisement, and how this advertisement is being promoted in the online environment, either through content recommender systems or through this ad delivery technique. And I believe that transparency can deliver only as much, especially when it comes to ad delivery techniques. These are opaque automated systems that often function on the behavioral patterns of individual users, on something that we refer to as inferred and observed data, that carry within a major possibility for abuse. And since these are very opaque systems, or often we refer to these systems also as black boxed, no matter how much transparency user has about how these systems operate and what kind of data these systems use, transparency cannot really achieve that protective standard that we look for. And that's why civil society pushed in past years for the ban that include also the use of inferred and observed data, especially for ad delivery technique, which is very much in line with the guidelines issued by the European Data Protection Supervisor, as well as the opinion of the European Data Protection Board. So from that perspective, we did have some success, especially within the European Parliament, that European Parliament's position on this proposed regulation contained that potential ban on the inferred and observed data. Of course, we would love to see it in the final text too. And what we at least would like to see is prevention of the use of any personal data within the political advertising. And as my colleague from Google already rightly pointed out, we don't even see that this is necessary for an effective, democratic and transparent political campaign. There are a number of other issues at stake, and that's also the protection of political speech in the EU. I think that it's very essential that whatever we will try to target through this proposed regulation, it will actually remain in the realm of sponsored and paid for content that is supposed to be the part of that political campaigning. We do see the need to tackle different type of content as well, but we don't see, or I don't personally see, how we could actually achieve both tackling potentially harmful speech that may somehow influence or negatively shape opinions and lead to polarization, but still something that actually falls in a realm of non-paid political content versus political advertising. And I truly believe that both of the goals cannot be achieved in one regulation, because ultimately either the protection of non-commercial political speech will suffer as a result of that. We have to see where we will land with the regulation. We always remain at disposal to help to negotiators and provide our opinions in that. But we are also worried that the scope of the regulation might actually go too far and have negative consequences for fundamental protection in Europe. I'll stop there and happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you very much, and I can reassure you that freedom of expression was fully embedded in Commission proposal. That was something which was central to our preparation. I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Lassorella. You are national regulator. You are also chair of ERGA and the European Regulator Group for Audiovisual Media. And we would like to hear from you your experience and your views on political ad, and especially focusing on experience and good practice in this sector. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for this initiative. As you said before, I have two hats. So I will first start with the first hat, that is that of the Italian regulator. And I will very shortly tell you about our experience in not regulating political advertisement, but regulating political debate, which is something different, but it is connected in a way. In Italy, we had a long story that goes to a law of the 2000 concerning the regulation of political debate on the audiovisual sector. The law distinguishes between advertisement, which is not allowed, communication, political communication from the party, which is supposed to be free. So the media operators have to grant, especially the public sector operator has to grant spaces for political communication and political information, which is based on an idea that they have to have, each political party has to have equal time. So all this legislation is aimed at preserving pluralism. I do not want to go further in the details of the Italian law. What I want to see, that what comes out of the experience of this legislation is that it is important to regulate political debate and now to regulate political advertisement as a level playing field for the political confrontation for the elections. So this is the positive experience of the Italian. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of critics that probably it was applied in a too strict way, but at least it is important that this was an experience of regulating the political debate before the election. What happens now? Well, as we all know, the digitalization of the environment, of the media environment, has completely changing the set. So now we still have that law concerning the audiovisual, which is still applied, but politicians obviously make interventions on the web through social media, and that is a very relevant part of the political communication. So we, as the national regulators, we also asked formally the Parliament to rediscuss, to think again on the regulation of political debate on the audiovisual sector, to try to extend that on to the political, also to the web. And then comes my second hat, the hat of the regulator of the ERGA group. What is the ERGA group? Many of you know it very well. It is not only an association of regulators, but it is an advisory body to the European Union. So it provides the place and the occasion to confront and to discuss among authorities, and it provides also the place to contribute to the European legislation. I want to very briefly give you some hints about two very important expressions. Two very important experiences. One was the monitoring of the code of practice on disinformation. The code of practice, ERCA was entrusted with the role of monitoring the enactment of the code of practice of political information, and that monitoring brought to the strengthened code of practice of political information. It will be particularly important that what came out of this strengthened code of political information becomes, in a way, part of the risk assessment of the platforms concerning disinformation that comes under the DSA, because that will be a completion of the picture that goes from auto-regulation, self-regulation, to co-regulation. Then we also participated to contribute to the elaboration. We just expressed our contribution to the regulation of the political advertisement and in the process of the EMFA, which is the other pillar of the regulation of let's say, of the political debate in Europe in view of next elections. And I'm happy to say that the European Parliament, thank Mr. Gozzi, and took many of our suggestions. So we completely share what is now what has come out of the Parliament, and obviously we are waiting for the trilogue to come out to further to the final development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all this extremely informative presentation. I would like now to give the floor to the representative of Bulgaria to share your perspective on this file. Thanks a lot.
Hello to everybody. Well, in the last 3 years, here we in Bulgaria have a lot of experience in elections, 6 different types of elections. In 2021, we have 3 times elections for parliament, once for president. In 22, again for parliament. In 23, again for parliament. And now in 1 week, in 98th of October, it will be a local elections for mayors. So actually we live in elections for the last couple of years, and to be more interesting, this happened in the context of frequent and cardinal changes in our legislations about elections. Of course, especially for political advertising, there is a couple of special things that maybe be interesting for you. First of all, our frame regulation is focused only on the traditional media, TV, radio, papers, but extremely exclude social media. In that meaning, we cannot control anything about that. Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, every other ways to communication is out of our control, and it's a big problem because if for the traditional media we have rules and we have a way to involve and to follow the borders in social medias, we cannot find any abuse of fund spends, of origin of these funds, of monitoring of the way that for example, a speech of hate is using, or for misuse of personal data, which is a big problem in our country. And in that meaning, I think that all that regulation that the European Commission take in the last couple of years and months, especially in the this point for the political advertising, is really important to us, because Bulgarian society, sorry if it sounds a little bit rude, but I think we have not very grown up. We are like social immature. I know how that sounds, but it's true. For example, in our legislation, there is a special rule which is obligate for all political ads to have a special label on it. Never mind that's paper or video or audio. They have to include this sentence: buying and selling votes is crime. We all know that, but this is a special rules which is punished if is missing from any advertising materials. So that's a little bit embarrassing for me to read everywhere in every political advertise this buying and selling vote is crime. But it also proved that our society is really not enough growing up in this democracy understanding of importance of free will. So in that way, I really appreciate to the Commission and to the Parliament that they have these strictly rules for political advertising, and of course they will be part of our national legislation. The other specific thing is that we have a special funds that the government provides for the people who are involved in elections. The financing of election campaign, almost 4 million euros every campaign are given like media packaging, we call them, to the political subjects who are candidates and who has to have the right to express yourself and their ideas. Control of this funds is very strict, and it's made not just from Central Election Commission, but also in our Ministry of Finance. Every candidate has a right for about 20,000 euro for expressing himself. Well, one of the problems is that all this happened in a very short period, because our control of political behavior of all politicians and media is strictly put in a 30 days period, which is 30 days before the day of the elections. And that's a problem because we have no mechanism, or we have no capacity to follow all the origin of not only to the funds, but who is behind that funds. And maybe in that way we'll be again very glad to have special rules from the commissions, because that's the only way. Our legislation is not ready to take this in national legislation. So the European rules are very important for us. That's what I want to say. And also I want to say that I really think that elections of 24 for European parliaments are very important by two reasons. First of all, that this election will be like a mirror for European Union itself. And the second is that these elections are chance for European Union to show to the world, not just here in the continent, but the whole world, that it's very stable and it's very important to prove that stabilism. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all this important message. I would like now to open the floor for questions. I'm checking if there are questions. I see someone in the front here. If you could bring the micro. Are there other questions? Yes, there will be one then.
My name is Armin Rabic from Election Watch EU. Yeah, thank you for these interesting contributions and what I think is a very fruitful discussion. I have a question about, because there's a representative of Google here, because it's not clear to me what is happening when political parties use the public funding they receive for political advertising on online platforms like YouTube, for example. So in 2019, ahead of the Austrian elections, we did a social media monitoring, and we saw that one political party, which is by chance the far-right populist political party in Austria, had over 1 million views and was far better placed than other political parties. So my question is there any regulation in place, or is there money flowing from YouTube or Google to this party back for having 1 million views? And is there any regulation planned that such a transfer of funding, which was primarily invested with taxpayers' money, whether this is possible or there is any prevention against such a deal? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to collect all the questions, and then we will give the possibility to all our panelists to reply. So I've seen there was a question there, if I'm not wrong, and I see two others. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Niklas Wilhelmsson from Ministry of Justice in Finland. Thank you for a great panel, very interesting. I would like to ask a very practical question from Mr. Gossi. I know that it's a very important piece of legislation that is under preparation with dealing with political advertising. What I would like to ask, is there now, when the preparation phase has been quite long, and we are soon, the next European elections are coming fairly soon. Do you have any more information that you could share about when implementation would start? Because I would say that it can be quite tricky to start implementing that piece in a very short period of time. As I understood, it will be a gradual implementation, but I would be glad to hear if you have anything more on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is a lady here.
Hi, thank you very much for an interesting discussion. I'm Mary Clara Sullivan from the Irish Electoral Commission. I have two separate questions. The first is for Liska Perkova, and it was just about what you said about the inferred and observed data, and I was just wondering, I'm not familiar with that, I was just wondering, could you give a couple maybe of examples of that? And then the second question, well, I'm not sure, it may be for Mr. Lazzarella, it's about the code of practice becoming a co-regulatory code under the DSA, and I'm just wondering, is that automatically going to happen, or is there some kind of negotiation process that still needs to happen before that's confirmed? Those are the two questions.
Thank you very much. I think there was one person left. No, I'm checking carefully. I think I need new glasses. I think we are done, so I'd like to give the floor back to our panelists, starting from this order.
Okay, I will start answering the question that was directed at me regarding inferred and observed data. So this is sort of a technique that can uncover hidden patterns in individuals' online behavior while they are browsing the platform or simply are on their accounts. And this way, actually, the more data is being derived about the person without actually them disclosing these data, and this can also lead to very personal data, based either on the behavioral patterns or even about information that you consciously or unconsciously disclose about yourself on your profile, and then through number of automated techniques, and especially processing large amount of these data, inferred and observed data can actually disclose even more personal information about you. And we have a number of examples from the past when even from non-sensitive or non-personal data, these automated techniques were able to derive very personal information about individuals, including their religious convictions or sexual orientation. So in that regard, because this happens through sophisticated automated decision-making processes or automated techniques, for individual user with maybe even more than a basic knowledge about how these technologies work, it's almost close to impossible to proactively defend ourselves against these type of abuse of our data and obtaining more personal information in order for to be targeted even with the higher precision. And that's why in our view, some use of data, especially sensitive categories of personal data, or ideally personal data in general for the purpose of targeting and profiling would be, ideal solution. Right now within the DSA, we at least have the ban for the use of sensitive categories of personal data, which is already revolutionary. When the negotiation started, we would never believe that we will get there. And ideally, we would continue to higher up that standard even more in the future. So just a very quick and short explanation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gozzi?
Yeah, especially on the question of the entry into force. So first of all, I want to reassure you, I know that you got the local and regional election in February. Nobody will ask Finland to apply the new rules in your regional and local election in February. So that's the first issue, because I understand that for many member states, it is, I understand absolutely the objective problems. It is, it requires an overall reorganization of the, so I understand that they require times. My position, the position which I expressed also in negotiation with the Council, is that in any case we should insert a sort of transitory clause that the first election where we will start to implement the new rules will be the European elections. So all the election before the 9th of June wouldn't be covered this time by the new rules, exactly to meet the concern of your country and of other member states. But I understand that this was something about which Finland has particularly insisted in the negotiation within the Council. Then on the entry into force, it is clear that from our perspective, the sooner the better, but we also want to find an agreement with the Council, and this is one of the most sensitive points at the moment. Therefore, I work for a sort of differentiated entry into force. There are some provisions, for example, the provision which must be implemented by the Personal Data Authority. The Personal Data Authority already exists. So, those rules which do not require the creation of new structure, of new procedure, but simply new task for existing authorities could be implemented already since the very beginning and already in the European election. There are some other provisions that require more time. There is some provision which is particularly loved by the Commission, which is the repository. The Commission is thrilled about this idea, but they say, we love the idea, but we cannot put it in place immediately. This is not necessary, after all, to have it immediately. For us, the repository is an instrument of transparency, of accountability. Because in the repository, you have to put all the different political advertising campaign that allows ex post a verification, be it from public authorities, be it from judicial authorities, be it from academic researchers, be it from other journalists. So we think that it's a very important instrument in terms of transparency to keep the record for at least more than one political cycle, so for us for at least more than 5 years, and of accountability and of transparency. But we understand that this is an overall new idea. We want to work on what is existing. For example, already the very large online platform got similar obligation under the Digital Services Act, so we want to create an interface system, but that is not necessary to be in place on the 9th of June 2024. It requires more time. We are ready, and we should, in my view, give the necessary time to put it in place. So this is a little bit our approach, which is very pragmatic, which is very flexible, and I hope that as this is one of the points on which we are discussing with the Council, and as we are moving forward to the Council on many points, on that many of the points which I have discussed today are really at the heart of the negotiation between the Council. We hope also that the Council will want to, in the last miles, to be flexible as we are, because we really need this new regulation. What you have heard today, I think it confirmed that we really need this regulation, and we don't have to miss the boat. And in my view, the last call is on the 6th of November. So I really hope that we will strike a deal on all the standing points.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gossi, for reminding us the urgency of having this new framework in place. Mrs. Massin.
Thank you. Very happy to reply on a few points. I mean, the first one on the from my colleague at Election Watch EU. So I mean, as long as a political party is a legitimate party, I mean, they basically receive, money at national level or not. Then what happens is that they will come and make an advertisement with us. And then what we would ask is at first they would be verified that it's legitimate, and then they would fill the criteria. Then they would have to declare where the money is coming from. So it would either come from them or it would come from EU money. And that would be actually declared, and you can see that. And then in terms of the million of people, I mean, this is actually would be quite common. I mean, it would depend on the, like for instance, I just went to check on the repository. I mean, the Parliament campaign on disinformation, they paid €50. They reached 700,000 people all over Europe. I just saw as well the mayor of Vilnius, paid €1,000, and then he reached out the Vilnius people. He got 3 million people. So I would say it's a classic. It would depend on the, the advertisement and everything, but it's not a surprising figure, basically, as such. Just in terms of the inferred observed data, I just wanted to specify that, and I think this is where, we would slightly disagree, but we have some data, which for us is like, for instance, we need to know the IP because it gives us the geography. So it tells us if the advertisement, we send it in Portuguese or in Polish. This kind of thing is important. It's also important for us to have the format. Like if you've got, I don't know, an iPad or a computer or, an Android, the format will not be the same. So just to serve the advert. So we think for us it's very important to get this information, and because otherwise we cannot actually technically serve, the advertisement. So just to specify that. But otherwise we totally agree to not having sensitive data. But we think we need some technical data to actually service, the work. And in terms of the timing, I mean, we absolutely look forward as well to the timing of the implementation, because it is true that, as I said, for us, it's going to be quite some changes, because it's going to be a much broader scope, because before we were only doing candidates, now it would be also people who are paid, basically, by candidates. So it will be quite a change. Even if it's not now, we will have to do regional elections, national elections, European elections, so much broader scope. And we will have to be working with all of you in terms of like the process to make it happen, a dialogue, basically, for compliance, all preparation, and that will take some time. So we need time to make that happen, indeed. Thank you. And I will leave you the code of disinformation.
The last speaker, the floor is yours.
It is, okay. Yes, the Code of Practice on Disinformation by now is an act of self-regulation. obviously, it was done in collaboration with the European Commission and with ERGA supervising on its application. What happens with the DSA? If in the DSA platforms agree to consider the code of practice, the addition to the principles, to the rules of the code of practice as a way to mitigate the risk that they assess, the risk concerning disinformation, it becomes part of the co-regulation, and it becomes a part of the co-regulation that is reviewed by the European Commission and then can also give way to sanctions. So I personally think that it will soon be considered co-regulation and will be assisted as well by sanctions. One point I wanted to say, in the enactment of the strengthened code of practice on disinformation, we considered particularly important what Mr. Gozzi said, the transparency of political messages. So the way to have a place where to find all these messages, to find all this, which is also a thing which is very important for the regulation on political advertising. So the best solution would be a repository where everyone can go and find, but also forms of interaction, of interoperability between among repositories taken by the platforms can be useful. What is important is that these messages, messages containing disinformation or political advertisement are public and are clearly reachable and are transparent. So in both areas, the transparency is particularly important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. La Sorella, for addressing the issue of co-regulation and the importance of transparency. I have very few minutes left, so if there is one additional question from the floor, it's feasible, otherwise I will close the session. I see that my neighbor will have something to add. Go ahead.
If I may just very quickly, I mean, of course, one thing is, for instance, information that is being inferred directly from a web browser, but we also know, based on Court of Justice decision, that inferred data can be also a sensitive category of personal data under Article 9 of the GDPR, so that's a bit of an oxymoron there. And just very quickly to respond and to complement to that question, very often where we see that the political advertising is being either not captured at all or misidentified is actually at the level of platforms. So we see that the algorithms often have a difficulty to capture what is political advertisement and what isn't, and that's where probably the problem is. And there was excellent research recently published either by University in Leuven and also NYU, where they actually looked into the numbers of false positives and false negatives when identifying political advertising. And very often this is due to the fact that sponsors do not declare enough information, or also because these algorithms are easily gamed. And of course, nowadays, political advertising is very much dependent on actors that do not necessarily fulfill traditional criteria of who is the sponsor of political advertisement in that traditional sense, which partially regulation is also trying to remedy. So maybe that's partially the answer to your question too.
As we have time, as you mentioned, sponsor, there is another last information that I want to give about our proposal, which comes out directly from the work we carry out in the European Parliament. You know that we set up a special inquiry committee on disinformation, against disinformation, foreign interference, and fake news. We have worked for more than 2 years, and one of the proposals which we have inserted in our version of the regulation and we want to defend in the negotiation is the ban for non-EU actors to be sponsored, to finance political advertising in the European Union. So you must be EU citizens or you must be a legal person resident in the European Union. We are not naive. We don't think that this is the only answer that we have to provide to defend ourselves to against the foreign interference, but we think that it is certainly a new legislative tool which is going to be very useful, and it's also a strong political message that we give of awareness and of drawing lessons for what happened. You mentioned Cambridge Analytica, Brexit referendum. I could mention the Italian constitutional referendum in 2016, the French presidential election in 2017. We know there have been heavy interference, also financial interference by non-EU actors. Well, if everything goes well, on the 6th of November, we will say stop to this kind of activities, and I think that is going to be very important for each of us as free citizens of a free European Union.
Thank you very much. I would like to give equal opportunities to the two other panelists. Mr. Lassorella.
I may just add one point. I said since the beginning that I did not want to interfere with the trilogue. There's one point which is very important, that are sanctions. In the experience of the regulators for the audiovisual sector, when the sanctions are not very clear, when there's not a common base, platforms and in general operators tend to make forum shopping and sanction shopping, so to go in the place where they find less sanctions. I don't want to interfere, but I understand that the idea is to put a roof to the sanction and not a pavement. Maybe the pavement would be more useful. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe one word on my side to close this panel. First of all, to warmly thank the speakers, and maybe to say that on our side, from the Commission side, we are very committed to help and support the implementation of this new text and involve, I would say, create multi-stakeholder forum, etc., to make sure that it becomes mainstream and we provide all the tools to help an easy implementation of this new text. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and we now break for coffee until 4:30.
Mm-hmm.